This is Idiot with a Library Card, and on today's show, I'm going to be taking another look at Ralph Ellison's 1952 novel, Invisible Man. Now, I occasionally go back and listen to old shows, and I went back and listened to my Invisible Man episode from February of 2021, and I have to say, I think I missed the mark explaining why this novel is so great. And I know I said how much I like it and why, but I failed to illustrate what makes this book great. So, I want to look at two scenes from the novel that really show how well crafted it is. The first scene I want to take a look at is actually very famous. And when this novel is talked about, this scene usually is involved in the conversation. It's the famous Battle Royale scene. And if you are unfamiliar, let me set it up for you. So, this is the opening chapter with the exception of a short prologue at the beginning of the novel. And so our protagonist, and again, if you haven't read the novel, and you really should, the protagonist is unnamed. So our protagonist has just graduated high school, and he's really smart and a great public speaker. He gives a speech at the commencement, and the speech is great. And because of that, he's invited to give the speech to the influential white men in the community. And they hang out at like an Elks Lodge type place. So he gets there to give this speech. And there are a whole bunch of other boys from his school. And they're there specifically to fight. It's kind of they're going to fight each other blindfolded, and whoever wins like a cash prize. And this fight is for the entertainment of the influential white men in the crowd. So the protagonist, since he's there and all the other black boys from his school are going to fight, they ask him if he would like to fight. He doesn't want to because he wants to give this serious speech, and he thinks it would take away from them taking him serious, which he's right, but they strongly suggest that he fight, or they really don't even care about the speech. So he ends up being involved in the fight. And then a brutal fight scene takes place, and the white men in the crowd are yelling things, and more importantly, what the white men are doing with the fight is that it has their undivided attention. They are all paying attention to the fight completely. Nothing else can distract them. And the white men are humiliating these black young men by throwing money on the ground, and parts of the floor are electrified, and it's shocking the kids as they, try to reach for the money. And it's just a really humiliating scene for everyone involved, especially our protagonist. So after all this, our protagonist is told he can give his speech. So he does. But now his clothes are all messed up, he is bloody and bruised, and his mouth is filling with blood. But more importantly, the white men in the crowd couldn't care less. They're talking to each other, they're not paying attention, they're ordering drinks, and it's almost like our protagonist is, what's the word? Maybe invisible? And that's the thing. The scene really does a great job showing the thesis of the book. It's an old movie adage to show and not to tell. And this is also an important message for message-heavy books, where you want to get your message across clearly, but you don't want to make it so blunt that you take the reader out of the central story. And this book rides that line so perfectly. And this chapter in particular, it uses brutal and blunt imagery to show how blacks are not considered fully human by the society around them. The white elites will pay attention and acknowledge the black people when they are tearing each other apart and humiliating themselves. In a way, the whites at this party pay close attention to these black young men when they are acting like animals. But as soon as our protagonist acts like a human, and language is one of the great human achievements, and using language in an artful way is something that transcends just human achievement. It makes a man great. So when our protagonist is forced to act like an animal for the entertainment of the whites, he's seen, but not seen as a human, but as an animal. But when he is speaking and doing something for his own ends, something that makes him a man, he becomes invisible to the white society. So this scene, as an opening scene, does a lot of things you want an opening chapter to do. This opening chapter grabs you by the ears and lets you know that this book is not going to be a nice, relaxing beach read, that this book is going to illustrate the ugliness of racism. And it's going to do it in a way that makes you feel it in the pit of your stomach. So the scene sets up the theme of the book, and it doesn't hint at it. This theme of being seen and not seen by society, the general treatment of blacks in the United States, runs through the book. I think this is the most in-your-face example of the general message of the book. This opening chapter really establishes the kernel of the novel. And then it takes that kernel or seed and it waters it and it tends it. And then this seed from the opening chapter grows into a tree of complex ideas about race in America. And a lot of it is used with visibility as the metaphor. Every scene in this book is really layered, and this scene is no different. It does seem that the metaphor being used is more on the surface. The opening chapter takes you by the hand, introduces a lot of the ideas that are going to come up later on in the book, and sets your mind to think in these terms so that when the more complicated ideas and more complicated metaphors come along, I feel like you're more able to see them and understand them and digest them. This book is really great in a lot of different ways. Not only the message and social commentary, which is really well done, it's a really well-written book. And although complex and deep, it's also very obtainable by your average idiot with a library card. So again, the opening chapter really sets up and pushes the thesis of the book. This book also takes breaks from the main idea to explore other aspects of race in America. The other scene I want to talk about could in theory be taken out of the book and it really wouldn't change the story at all, but it's such a nice little fable placed in the middle of the book. It really adds to the character of the book without altering the story. So to set up the scene, the first scene I talked about was right at the beginning of the book. This is middle towards getting to the second half of the book. You're probably in the second half of the book. So a lot has happened. And again, you really should read the book, but I'll just set up the scene a little bit. Basically, our protagonist then went to college after high school. He gets kicked out of college. He goes to live in New York. He has a few adventures there, and I'm glossing over a lot, but this episode's already starting to get a little long. But basically, he has finally found a job, and the job looks like it's going to suit him. And the organization he joins seems to see him as a man and not just as a black man. So his first day of work, he is going to get a new apartment. The organization he works for is like a communist community organizing organization. Try to say that 5 times fast. He's going to leave this boarding house he's living. He's moving on to bigger and better things. And really the important part of this scene is that he's starting a new life. His name isn't given throughout the whole story. Since this organization's kind of secret and communistic, they give him a fake name. So basically he's going to have a new apartment, a new name. His whole life is starting over basically. And so he is basically getting a clean slate from all of his past. And this is important to keep in mind. He wakes up to some banging in the from another room in the boarding house. I'm not sure what it's supposed to symbolize or what it means, but there's like this loud banging. He sees in the corner of his room this racist bank. Like a racist, it's like a piggy bank, but it's a statue of a black person. I'll read to describe it, and I think you'll see why it clearly a racist sort of sketch of a black person as a statue. From the beginning of chapter 15. Then, near the door, I saw something, which I'd never noticed there before. The cast iron figure of a very black, red-lipped, and wide-mouthed Negro. Those white eyes stared up at me from the floor, his face an enormous grin. His single large black hand held palm up before his chest. It was a bank, a piece of early Americana. The kind of bank, if a coin is placed in the hand and a lever pressed upon the back, will raise its arm and flip the coin into its grinning mouth. For a second I stopped, and feeling hate charging within me, then dashed over and grabbed it, suddenly as enraged by the tolerance or lack of discrimination or whatever that allowed Mary to keep such a self-mocking image around. And Mary is the landlady of the owner, proprietor of the boarding house. He sees this racist statue, and you can hear by the description, it's got that, it's very dark with the big red lips and big stupid smile. So you could see why it's so galling to him. He ends up smashing it on a pipe in his room. And then he's got to leave. He doesn't want to make Mary upset that he broke her bank, although he hates it. So he ends up wrapping it in a package, and he decides, you know what, I'm just going to throw it out on my way to my new apartment. So he leaves to throw it out. He leaves with the package, and he's just going to dump it somewhere on his way to the new apartment. So he goes to throw this thing out in trash cans out by the side of the road, waiting to be picked up. When he puts the case in the trash, the woman who the trash can belongs to comes out of her house and yells at him to take the trash back. They have a verbal confrontation, but in the end, he takes the package out of the trash and moves on with his day. So he can't get rid of it there. So then he decides to just sort of drop it at a street corner while he's crossing the road. Unfortunately, a good Samaritan picks it up and brings it to him. Our protagonist tries to deny that he dropped the package, but the guy's persistent. When the protagonist keeps arguing with the man who picked up the package, the man starts accusing him of trying to pull some sort of scam or that he's doing some sort of like illegal dead drop or something like that, and he threatens to call the police. So the protagonist just takes the package with him and puts it in his briefcase. And this package is now going to stay with him the rest of the story. Although I will say, the statue actually never comes up again in the story until like the last chapter. It's sort of just mentioned. But as I said, this scene could actually be cut out of the story and wouldn't really change it. But it does a lot of cool things, and let me just talk about that. So now, the scene on a surface level is actually funny. It's kind of a comedy bit. The symbolism is quite tragic. The way the scene's written, it is very funny. And it's a scene I had to go back and reread. The scene is fun to read. And again, it is actually very funny. Like, I chuckled. And I thought, there's actually a similar scene in an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where he tries to throw an apple core away in someone's trash can, and they give him a hard time, and he doesn't understand why, and they argue. It's a good comedy bit, and it works on that level, but there's also much deeper meaning that isn't funny and is actually quite tragic. As I read it, I chuckled a little, and the thing is, the humor of this scene, it doesn't take away from the message. At least to me, it makes me pay attention more to the message. And the symbolism is clear. Even though our protagonist is starting a new life completely fresh, a new name and all that, he cannot escape the fact that he's black. And that has baggage to go with it. Try as he might, he will not be able to get rid of that baggage. And more to a general theme in the book, he has to carry this baggage. It's not him who wants to carry it. It's other people who will not let him discard this baggage, get rid of his racial identity, or be able to get rid of negative racial stereotype. He can't throw that baggage away. No one will let him. And although I don't know if Ralph Ellison was trying to make this point as well, but the people who do not like him, the lady with the trash can, they had a kind of violent altercation. She was mean to him. She won't let him get rid of that baggage. But even the people trying to help him, you know, the person at the street corner was actually just trying to do a good deed, just thought he dropped the package by accident. People who are trying to help him won't let him leave this racial baggage behind. He goes to his clean new life, his great new job, holding on to the fact that he's black in America in the late 40s, early 50s. And no matter what he does, how good of a job he does, how rich and powerful he becomes, he will always have to carry that negative racial stereotyping with him. It's just a great scene that's perfectly constructed and executed. And this book, again, is just full of scenes like that. I cannot recommend this book enough. It's important, it's deep yet accessible, and just terrifically written. I really love this book. It is definitely getting a reread soon for me. It's broken into my list of top 10 novels. And I think if I enjoy it the second time around, it's important that if you want to make the top 5 for me, you got to be a book that's enjoyable on multiple reads, and some books aren't, and I'm not sure about this one yet. The second time around, I actually do think I will enjoy reading this book again, and I think it's going to crack the top 5 for me. Not that Ralph Ellison cares or anyone cares what my top 5 novels are, but I'm just saying it's that good in my eyes. I enjoyed it that much. So I actually would recommend, and I do like to do recommendations occasionally for like certain types of people. Like certain types of people will like this book or that book. I actually recommend that everyone read this book. Anyone who listens to this show, I think, will get something out of and enjoy Invisible Man. And if you read it, really pay attention to just how packed this book is with interesting observations and just really well thought out ideas and great symbolism and beautiful use of English language. I just cannot rave about this book enough. So it's definitely at your local library. It's a all-time. Again, I think I said in the February 2021 show, if it's not at your library, go talk to your librarian and kind of suggest that maybe they get it for the library because it's that good. So thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. And I hope to be coming out with another show shortly.